Any questions? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I have. Did you guys hear that question? So there's a nullification bill, what's called state nullification, pending in Tennessee. And I hear this a lot, that we ought to do, people will say we ought to do nullification instead of calling a convention of states. Right. Some people say with too, but a lot of folks who might oppose convention of states, say runaway convention stuff, they'll say we should do nullification. So here's the problem with nullification as I see it. Number one, in politics, one of the most important things is how you talk about stuff. It's not what the stuff is even as much as how you narrate it and how you tell the story. The second you say nullification in the United States of America, there's a huge swath of America that says slavery. Because this is what the Confederate States said during the Civil War. They said, we're going to nullify federal laws that we don't like. And so now people say, well, you want to bring back slavery. And from my perspective, that's not a narrative box where we want to be having a fight, right? So fighting about nullification, not good. Also, this is facetious. I'm saying this facetiously, but it's actually true, which is I say nullification is for people who hate their children and their grandchildren. And the reason I say it like that is because in Washington, D.C., we have a multi-trillion-dollar industry whose job it is to pass laws that you and I hate. Right? They do it full time. They're literally there all year round, every single year, and they're doing this constantly, and they make billions and then trillions of dollars doing it. So they're going to pass the laws, and then we, state by state, one by one, out of the thousands of laws they pass, are going to nullify the ones we don't like. By the way, they can pass that same law again tomorrow. Nullification doesn't prevent them from doing that same thing literally the next day. And so the problem is, that's a game, it's like Groundhog Day. You just have to play that game over and over. It's not functional. And then the last thing I would say about nullification is it leads to chaos. If one state can nullify a federal law, then we really don't have a federal system any longer. We have a bunch of sovereign states just doing their own thing, whatever they want. You know, if we look at what, I'll give you a practical effect of nullification, sanctuary cities. That's nullification, right? So I'm just going to say I don't really care what federal immigration law is. We're not going to enforce that. We're not going to cooperate with ICE. That is nullification. And so I think that generally speaking, nullification is anti-rule of law and it creates anarchy ultimately. And so I'm just not a big fan of nullification. Yes, ma'am. You want to ask that again?
What would be the very next step after we got to the 34 states?
So once the 34 state calls for convention, and all the applications have to match, they have to say the same thing. That's how you get what's called aggregation. What's supposed to happen according to the Constitution is that Congress names the time and place for convention. That's their role under the United States Constitution. It's not optional. It says they shall call the convention and name the time and place. So that would be theoretically the next step. I want to be really careful because some people say, well, I don't think Congress will do that. They'll just mess with us. They don't listen to us anyway. Possible, I would say. And my response to that, to quote or paraphrase an old Western that I love, we don't need no stinking Congress. Because the states retain the sovereign authority to gather whenever they want to. So either Congress will name the time and place or the states will gather on their own. When they gather, every state will choose a group of what are called commissioners, delegates to the convention. Technical term is commissioners. The state legislature chooses the commissioners to the convention. They can name one or they can name 100, up to every state. But each state gets one vote. They will then do what's called commissioning them. They will give them instructions that they bring to convention with them. It says what their authority is. It tells their delegation what the limitations on their authority given by their state are on them. They'll go to convention. At convention, they will elect officers of convention. So they'll gather in convention. Tradition is whoever hosted the last convention will be the temporary chair of the convention. So it's plausible that if we look back to the Constitutional Convention, you could say it would be Virginia, potentially. Somebody will end up being the temporary chair of convention. They'll elect officers, president of convention, a secretary, sergeant at arms, parliamentarian, all that stuff. And then they'll break up, just like a legislature does, into committees and subcommittees, and they'll debate the various proposed amendments. And so we have that three parts that Kevin was talking about: term limits, fiscal restraints, and limits on the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government. Those committees will then report to what they call the body of the whole, or the committee of the whole, and they'll vote on those proposed amendments. And if we can get 26 states to agree on any one or a group of amendments, those amendments then get sent out to the states for ratification by 34 states. So that's kind of the process, walking through the process. Yes, sir. Yeah, so Wayne said you got to know your enemies, and we definitely have some enemies out there. And he asked specifically about Common Cause. I don't know how many are familiar with the name Common Cause. Common Cause is George Soros' main policy arm. He's got two main policy arms, Common Cause and Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. These are nonprofit groups that push progressive policy in the United States of America. Prime Funders comes out of the Soros network. And they hate us a lot. And they actually understand us as well as anybody does out there. If you go to their webpage, they have an entire huge section of their website about Convention of States, about the idea of calling a Convention of States. They have grave fears over what we're going to do. Mostly, if you look at what they say that we're going to do, it's true. Yeah, I mean, they say that we want to do away with most of the administrative state. They say that we want to gut federal power and return the power to the states. They say that we believe in states' rights. They say that we want to do away with the administrative agencies, EPA, USDA, FDA, the Department of Education, the Department of Energy. These are all things, by the way, that the federal government was never supposed to do, right? And so they say all this stuff about us, and I say, yes, all those things are true, Wayne. But then their opinion is they think all that stuff is bad. And so they're very nervous about it. The stuff, now this is going to shock you, I know, the stuff that they say about us, the worst stuff they say about us. They say that we're racist, right? We are white supremacists, we are Christian nationalists, all the usual slurs that they like to throw around. But that's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise aimed at us. And they're constantly putting out hit pieces on us. We had a hit piece from Business Insider late last year. Former senator from Wisconsin, Russ Feingold, a real, genuine, dyed-in-the-wool Democratic socialist, wrote an entire book. The book was actually a very good book. If you want to understand how Convention of States works, it's a good book. And then he says it's really bad because they want to do all this stuff. And so those people are all aligned against us. There's another fringe element that you will hear, and this is an element on the right. And it's important you know that there are enemies on the right. If you go far enough around the circle to the left or right, you come to the same place, right? And so we have a fringe on the right. There's a couple of groups primarily in America. One is called the John Birch Society. Anybody heard of the John Birch Society? Yeah, I mean, they go way back to the 1950s. They were formed as an anti-communist organization. And, like so many people, 85, 90% of what they say is right and true and good, in my opinion. And they have a thing about Article 5, and they just say we should never use it, and they love the Constitution except Article 5, and they think the framers were geniuses except they were idiots when they drafted Article 5. And it's just crazy stuff, and they say really nasty, horrible things about us all the time. Apparently, and just so you know, because you might have been tainted, apparently I'm paid by George Soros. This is one of the things that they say all the time. Yes, there you go. So that's one group, and and the second group that you might have heard of is Eagle Forum. Eagle Forum was founded by a really great woman by the name of Phyllis Schlafly, one of the early fighters for the right to life in the United States of America. Incredible woman. She was just wrong on this issue. She was wrong because she had a friendship with Chief Justice Warren Burger. Burger was the Chief Justice who signed Roe versus Wade. A little weird to have the Chief Justice who signed Roe versus Wade be good friends with a woman who's one of the primary fighters for the right to life in America. But they had this very unusual friendship. And she had asked him at one point what he thought of the idea of calling a convention. And he said, oh, it'll be terrible. We'll have a runaway convention and we'll lose our Constitution. He was trying to stop her and the conservatives from calling a convention. They were trying to overturn Roe versus Wade at the time. And so that's where that opposition comes from. By the way, those groups and anybody you hear who is opposed to Convention of States will use the same arguments as the radical left. And Common Cause and Center on Budget and Policy Priorities have put together a coalition of 250 plus leftist groups. It's every single leftist group that you have ever heard of. And that's not an exaggeration. It's Common Cause, it's Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, it's La Raza, it's MoveOn.org, it's the Socialist Party of America, it's the Communist Party of America. It's Hillary Clinton and Howard Dean. It's all of these people together opposing Convention of States. So to those on the right who might oppose us, I often ask them, how's it feel to wake up in the morning and be on the same side as George Soros and Hillary Clinton? Kind of weird. You got to ask yourself about that. So those are our enemies, Wayne. We know they're out there, and we deal with it every single day in the legislatures. It's really weird to have like League of Women Voters, Sierra Club, and the John Birch Society testify against us. Odd bedfellows, for sure. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, the question is there a strategy to get to 15 more states? The answer is yeah, absolutely. And every year, what we do is we go in, we work with our state teams, like the folks that you see here who are volunteers, and we develop plans for every state. In a past state, it's going to be other stuff we're working on. In the states that are not yet passed, we're trying to figure out how close are they to passage. Do they have the right sponsors? What's our whip count in a legislature? And then each year we prioritize the legislatures that we think are close to getting across the line. And that's where we pour extra resources. We never ignore anybody. But in a state like Carolina, and we're going to dump everything we've got at North Carolina right now because we're so close, right? Ohio, Pennsylvania, these other states that are getting close, we're going to put everything into those things. So the strategy is focus maximum resources on the states that are the closest. And then in the longer game, and this is going to take several more years, there are states we're going to have to flip. And there are states, for example, like Nevada, that's a flippable state. That's really important. I think Minnesota is a state that can be flipped back. Virginia is a state we can definitely flip back. I think we're going to flip Virginia. I would predict in 2025 that becomes an all-Republican state. And so there's a few states we're going to have to flip like that, and we have strategies for each of those states. And so our influence reaches beyond just the legislatures into legislative elections to make sure we set the states correctly to precede the passage of Convention of States. Yes, sir. Oh, over here first.
Yes, I'd like to go back to nullification.
Please do.
And I'm going to read from Article 6.
Yes.
This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made. So it goes on.
Yep.
But we consider that most of the laws that are being passed now are not made in pursuance of the Constitution. So it is the duty of the states to nullify them.
So I don't disagree with you. This is where we may disagree, okay? I think what you said is absolutely factually correct, probably inarguably correct, I would say. In politics, politics is the art of possible. And so we can wish for things, we can hope for things, but they have to be possible. Otherwise, we're wasting our time. I would love, personally, right now, to have a United States House of Representatives that has a supermajority of very conservative Republicans. That's a wish. It's not going to happen now. It's not going to happen in the next couple of cycles. It's just not the political reality in the United States of America. So when I look at nullification, I ask, how many states have a serious, legitimate nullification movement inside their legislatures? What number of states? And I can tell you for sure, because I've been in 49 states around the country and the legislatures, and most of them, the number is 0. There's no appetite for nullification in the state legislatures. If there were, I'd be happy to pursue it and amplify it. But I understand that we can't create something that doesn't exist. And so the political reality of nullification today, whether we think we should do it or not, and I had reasons why I think there's some problems with it, but even if I said we absolutely should do it, it's just not something that's happening in the United States of America today. And one of the things that I've realized now doing politics nationally for 15 years, I can't make anything happen out of whole cloth. I can go out in America and find a sentiment that exists and a thing that people broadly believe, and I can help give that a place to come to life and be amplified. That just doesn't exist in regard to nullification in the United States today. It may at some point, and if it would, I might support it at that point. But just practically speaking, we're just not there.
So why would you not support nullification? My concern that would be that if we were to call a convention, that the same thing would happen as happened in 1787 when the delegates were called together to ratify or to amend the Articles of Confederation, and they scrapped them. I don't want to see our Constitution be scrapped.
I'm really glad you brought that up. That's a really important point. This is a a mistaken history that's really terrible and offensive to the name of the founders. When we think about the framers of the Constitution, as you think of them, I'm sure, as we all think of them, we revere them, not in a religious sense, but we think these are amazing men of honor and integrity, right? And what's that? Does that make sense to you for who they were? I mean, think of the time in American history. That was a time in American history when the concept of honor was held in such high regard that if you said I was a liar, I could say, you and I need to go outside and I'm going to shoot you, right? We're going to have a duel. And that was in a lot of places legal, just because you insulted me, right? Aaron Burr, right? And so I want you to think about that. I want you to think about men like, well, let's just say George Washington, who was the president of convention. Do you really believe that George Washington just said, hey, I'm going to do whatever I want. I don't really care what we were sent to do? So here's the reality, because that didn't happen. 7 states commissioned their delegates before Congress even called for a convention. It started with Virginia. 7 states had commissioned their delegates, had called for a convention, and in their commissions, we know, we can read the documents that they sent, the commissioners have, this is the language, common language in at least 7 of them, says, the commissioner has any and all authority necessary to render the federal constitution adequate for the exigencies of the union. No limitation on their authority. This is the document that controls what the states said that they were sending their delegates or commissioners to do. There was a belief for a long time in American history that there was a runaway convention, or they were only sent to amend the Articles of Confederation. That belief came because after 7 states commissioned their commissioners, Congress weighed in. And this is something we see Congress do today. Oh, everybody wants something. We better do something, right? So Congress said, they issued what they called themselves a recommendation. They had no authority to call a convention. No such authority exists in the Articles of Confederation. And they said, we recommend the states gather to amend the Articles of Confederation. Recommend, they were very precise in their language. They didn't say, we're calling a convention, we're saying you have to do this thing, because they knew they didn't have any authority. They made a recommendation. The states commissioned their delegates to do whatever was necessary to fix the system of governance. By the way, when I used the word constitution, it said to render the federal constitution adequate for the exigencies of the union. They didn't have a constitution, so that's a little weird. But they used that word differently than we do today. What they meant by that was constitution of the government. In other words, the form of government, the way government is constituted. So this is really important that you understand this history. We didn't know this history until probably 12 years ago, maybe 13 years ago. Professor Rob Natelson went to the National Archives. He pulled those commissions, literally the physical commissions. He was the first person. Can you imagine doing that? I picture him like opening in the drawer and there's a bunch of dust and he blows them off. I'm sure it wasn't like that. That's kind of what I picture, like Indiana Jones or something. He goes there and he pulls these commissions out of the drawer and reads them, and he's doing research on Article 5 because he's an opponent of the use of Article 5. He fears a runaway convention. He believes 1787 was a runaway convention. He pulls those documents out. He reads them. He's like, wait a second. These guys had all the authority that they needed to completely start anew. The states granted them authority. Madison says in Federalist 51, if you want to know the authority of the convention, read the commissions of the commissioners to the convention. So I think this is really important. I understand why you would say that. It's just not true, and that should make you feel better about the guys that you and I revere who were the framers, who did the honorable thing and lived up to their commissions. There were, by the way, and this is an important side note, 2 states that did not have full authority. And that was Massachusetts and New York, and neither of those states voted in the convention because New York didn't have authority also because they lost the quorum of their delegates. They only had 1 delegate left. That was John Hancock. John Hancock stayed. He argued, he debated, but he never voted because he didn't have a quorum from his state. Massachusetts did not have full authority, and they got sent with the language that said to amend the Articles of Confederation, so they never voted on anything. So that's just a really important side note because people always say to me, well, how could it work? It didn't work in 1787. It worked exactly like they intended it to work. And then one last thing I would say to wrap that up in a nice, neat little bow. It takes 2/3 of states to call a convention, right? We all know that because that's in the Constitution. If they were not limited absolutely by what those applications said, then we would have had a convention a long time ago. There's over 400 applications sitting there with Congress for a convention of states. We've just never reached the requisite 2/3 of states being in absolute agreement what the limitations on a convention would be. So 1787, not a runaway. We absolutely can limit it.
The point is, though, they just scrapped what we had.
They were told to scrap what we had. I mean, of course they did. If you went to a meeting and somebody said to you, hey, your job is to, if you need to, scrap that document and write something completely new, and you did that, then you'd done what you were asked to do. So that's what, and by the way, thank God they did do the job that they were asked, but that was the job they were asked to do by their states. I mean, no, it's okay. And this is really important because this is the main argument against. So that's why I'm giving you this time. And it's not to argue with you. I don't want you to feel, I hope you don't feel picked on. These are super important questions and points that you're making. Is it possible that the whole thing gets scrapped and we get something that's terrible and new and not near as good? And the answer is absolutely, unequivocally, no, not possible. And here's why. 34 states agree in advance to the limitations on convention. That has to happen or we don't get a convention. If you do the math, that's a super majority. So every state is passing the same resolution. There are copies back there so you can get that resolution. It's 3 things. They can discuss anything involving term limits for Congress and other federal officials. So that's staffers, bureaucrats. It's the deep state. I call it the Fauci Amendment. We don't ever want another 40-year Fauci guy, right? So that's number 1. Number 2 is anything that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. That would include things like a balanced budget, tax caps, spending caps, stuff like that, imposing generally accepted accounting principles on the federal government. And the third thing is anything that would limit the power and the scope of the federal government, shrink it down to size. That's where we can do away with the Department of Education, Health and Human Services, all that stuff. That's all they can discuss. And if they were to discuss anything else, anybody from a conservative state could raise their hand just like you do in the legislature. Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, point of order, just like we would do at a county convention, point of order. This is outside the call of the convention. It's non-germane, and it would be ruled non-germane. Again, remember, 34 states have agreed in advance what the subject matter is. So there's no chance that some rogue person could just do whatever they want. Then you have to get 26 states to agree on any proposed amendment. It takes a majority of states to agree on an amendment. And then I would say this is the most important thing about a convention. It's just a suggestion. Like anything that comes out of convention, let's say the worst case scenario, because I'm a big gun guy, it's that they say they're going to repeal the Second Amendment. Let's say, I don't know how it happens based on what I just told you can't happen, but let's say it happens. I'm from California originally. Those guys, they're crazy, right? And you guys know a lot of them here in Arizona. So let's say they propose the repeal of the Second. Let's say somehow they get 26 states, even though 34 states said we're not going to talk about that. Somehow they get 26 states to agree to talk about it. They pass it. It goes out. Now you have to get that ratified by 38 states. And I'll give you personally a challenge, and anybody listening, and I've done this to millions of people, literally, on Hannity and Shapiro and all these shows I've been on. I give out my personal email address, mmeckler@cosaction.com. Tell me the amendment you're worried about, and then list the 38 states that will ratify it. And I've been doing that 10 years. I've sent it to millions of people. I've not got a single email. Because you can't, I've tried. Like anything I can think of that I wouldn't like, you can't possibly get 38 states that would ratify it. It takes only 13 states to stop anything. That's the 13 most conservative states in the United States of America. So one house in the 13 most conservative states in the United States of America. Actually, just one committee in one house of the 13 most conservative states in the United States of America to stop anything. On the Second Amendment, currently, there are 29 states that have constitutional carry. Proud to say Arizona is one of those. Florida is the most recent that just brought us to 29. 24 states allow you to carry your handgun in the legislature. I like that. I've been able to do it. By the way, you guys should have what Texas has. We have a fast pass lane if you're carrying your handgun into the legislature. You literally can go to the front of the line and walk right in. They're like, yes, you have a gun. Come on in. I love that. And then there are 14 states that allow you to take an AR, rack one into the chamber, sling it across your back, sit in the gallery and watch the proceedings with your loaded AR. I don't recommend that. I'm not saying I recommend that. I just want to be clear. But you can. imagine, could we not get 13 states to say no to the repeal of the Second Amendment or anything we really don't like? So the idea that this convention could run away, even if it did, you still have to get ratification, and nobody's ever been able to tell me what they're afraid of being ratified that they think they could get 38 states to ratify. This is not because I'm smart, it's because the framers were geniuses and they didn't want anything getting into our Constitution that wasn't accepted by the vast majority of the population. By vast, I mean 3/4 of the country. And there's nothing radical that 3/4 of this country would accept. The country's too divided. Did you guys hear this? Stories from, we should do a whole series, stories from the blue states, right? Yes, you might think it would be very depressing, but it's been pretty good lately. So for the last 2 years, we've had what we call the Massachusetts Miracle. We passed out of 2 committees 2 years in a row in Massachusetts. That's as blue as it gets. I mean, Massachusetts is deep, deep, dark, royal blue. And I have to give the credit to the state team, and really what it is building relationships within the legislature. They go in, and I would argue that probably 95% of our people are Republicans, and they're treating Democrats like people. And they go in, and they meet them, and they learn about their families, and they pray with them, and they've built relationships over the years, so they're respected, even if disagreed with in those legislatures, and so they've managed to make it out of 2 committees there. Not yet to the floor. Everything's incremental, so we've made it out of committee a couple of times, so I'm looking forward to a floor vote, hopefully next session in Massachusetts. The most recent happened last week, and this was in Hawaii. Most people don't pay attention to politics in Hawaii. You think California's blue? There's no Republicans in the Senate in Hawaii. Like 0 Republicans in the Senate, right? We have 5 Democrat sponsors in the Senate in Hawaii, and last week we had our first committee hearing in 5 years. We hadn't had a committee hearing for many years, and we made it out of committee. We call it the Hawaii Hallelujah. So we have good stuff happening. I was just in Connecticut probably 2 weeks ago, up in Hartford, Connecticut. Beautiful state capital, by the way, very colonial. And I was there. It's very blue. That is the one state out of 50 states where we've actually never even gotten to file a bill. They have a weird process. You have to have approval to file. And while I was up there in Connecticut, we got the Connecticut Miracle. They agreed next session, which will be January of next year, they're going to file that bill in Connecticut. So that'll mean all 50 states have filed. So we are starting to see movement. And I would add one last thing, which is if God smiles upon the nation and Donald Trump is our next president, that will motivate the left to be in favor of Convention of States. One of the things I saw when I traveled around the last time Trump was president was I could say this to people on the left: do you like Donald Trump being in charge? And usually I had to take one step back so that the swing would clear me when they roundhoused at me. And then I would say, do you like having a much more conservative Supreme Court? Did you like McConnell in charge of the Senate? How do you like D.C. telling you what to do? And they hated it. And they would say, no, we hate D.C. telling us what to do. And I would say, me too. I don't want D.C. telling California or New York or Illinois or New Jersey or Oregon or Washington or any of these liberal states what to do. I hate that. Frankly, let them go be as liberal as they want to be. So there's a lot more pressure on them to accept something like this if you have a very or more conservative government in Washington, D.C. So I think we're making progress. Yep, right here. Yep.
Thank you for standing up for liberty, for states' rights. I'll take on the Second Amendment because here's the issue. Climate change, you notice young people are actually believing it?
Yeah.
I mean, there's the sun, huge orb, of energy, and yet, though historically we had more carbon dioxide,
right.
So I think most people would know
yep.
it's full of unsupportable notions. But take the Iraq War. Take right now Ukraine. The Iraq War, the huge lies. People were not sure. I was questioning is like, how, if the CIA is saying it's true and the FBI, okay, it's got to be wrong, and I was right, that we went over and then for 20 years hung out in Afghanistan. We should have probably been out of there in 19 months or so. Go to Pakistan, get the guy, get out of there. How do you change a society if you're not willing to stay there for 60 years?
Right.
So guns, okay. Like Iraq, big media press or Trump, people who would like more liberty or opposed to Trump. so orange paint, the bad media, I'm tired of it all.
Right.
So there's another park, you know, another shooting, and it stretches out, and
Right.
and now the media and all the money for social media, for our mind control mechanisms, I think we're outnumbered. And that brings me to the thought that I have had on this matter, is that the caliber of you and you and Benjamin Franklin in that pub, and the people not in the pub, the farmers were more well-read then than the average is now.
Right.
And so
Agreed.
I do not believe it will succeed. I believe it will be hijacked by the socialists, who do coagulate into a blob of evil, as opposed to the individualists who don't tend to agree because they want to be
Right.
left alone. So when it gets taken over, which I think would happen,
Mm-hmm.
it will become a new universal rights of the people, as senseless and endlessly useless as the Soviet Union's constitution.
Right.
So I think we would be better to do the contract with America to the point where you say, I'm willing to be federally prosecuted, and no, I don't even like the federal, to criminally prosecuted for having lied to you and you and you when I say I will not raise taxes in my votes,
Right.
and the nullification, and getting people just to be educated. So I've said my piece.
Okay, so that was a lot. So I'll dig in on a couple points. One is, I think the first point you were trying to make is you think people would, well, aside from the runaway, let's assume that happens. Okay, I'm just going to assume that for sake of argument. You think people would do away with the Second Amendment. So but I have to disagree with you factually. All polling, leftist poll, hold on a second.
It's one of our safest ones. But
Hold on. But hold on, I got to deal with it because that's where you started. You said you have to disagree with me on the Second Amendment. That's where you started. Okay, but so this is important though. We got to be factual.
Yes.
The support for gun rights is the highest it's ever been in the United States of America. It's gone through the roof with young people. It's gone through the roof with women. It's gone through the roof with minorities. People understand the federal government, the state governments, the police aren't going to protect us anymore. We've got to protect ourselves. This is the safest point for the Second Amendment in modern American history, bar none. It's not even close.
All those people that don't believe the sun is the control of what we...
Well, look, but here's the problem. What you're saying is we've lost. Yeah, you are, because what you're saying is like we just can't trust anybody with anything because of all the mind control. So in that case, would be if I believed like you, I would never come to a meeting like this. I would buy a lot of ammo and a lot of guns. I have a lot of both, by the way, and I'm continuing to buy more. I'd have a lot of food stocks, got a lot of that too. I'd be ready and for whatever's going to come. I am, but I would not participate in politics anymore because it's a waste. Because if you believe all these people are too mind-washed and we can't do any of this stuff anymore and we're actually not capable of governing ourselves, well, then don't participate in politics. And I don't mean that as an insult to you, but this is super important. I hear this from people occasionally, and like you're basically saying, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, I'm paraphrasing, but you're basically saying, look, we shouldn't engage because if we engage, we might lose. And the answer is yes, we might lose. We might lose everything. I don't know. I'm not God. I know what our duty is, which is to fight, and that's what I'm doing. And I will accede to anybody who has a better plan that can show me the steps and the tactics and the strategy to achieve the goals according to that plan. I am not aware of that plan. I travel the country constantly. I'm probably on the road 250 days a year. I hear from personally, hundreds of thousands of people a year through social media and in meetings like this. And I don't know anybody with a better plan.
Statements are thankfully correct now, but I do not underestimate the effort of Newspeak, of George Orwell's 1984.
I don't either. That's why I'm fighting right now. So we can, if we say that I'm right now, then we should fight this right now because we might come to a point where we can't anymore. Look, we're all walking around with tracking devices and listening devices in our pockets. We've got them with us 24/7. This is way better than anything Stalin or Mao ever imagined. I personally have been persecuted by the federal government, by the IRS. I have friends who are in jail now. I have friends who have been prosecuted. That knock on the door that could come at midnight or 2 a.m. is not theoretical to me, right? But to me personally, this is not theory, right? Me and Patty have been through this ourselves. We have good friends who have been through this. My good friend James O'Keefe had his apartment raided and had his door kicked in. I was with him 2 days after that happened. I took him out of there to help him get his head straight. So I lived this every single day. Now is the time when we should go wild, fighting as hard as we can before we get to the point that you're worried about. I agree with you. All that stuff's coming.
First of all, I prefer dangerous liberty over peaceful servitude.
Absolutely.
So as long as there's a small minority of us setting brush fires of liberty tirelessly, I think we have a chance. Can you speak to the Arizona resolution and how we can recall our delegates if there's a runaway?
Yeah, so there's technicalities inside of a convention that provide extra protections. Important to remember, just basic law of agency. If you send somebody to a convention, you control that person. So the legislature sends your delegation. If a delegation did something that your legislators didn't authorize, they can be immediately recalled. That's without any extra protections. Arizona has passed extra protections that impose penalties on people that don't follow along with what they're told to do. They have the inherent right to withdraw those delegates and withdraw their authority at any time. People act like this is some big mystery. I just got to tell you, as a lawyer, as a business person, a lot of you in this room are business people. It means and even if you're not, you've probably had homeowners insurance or automobile insurance, and you get those through an agent, right? And let's say you go to your auto agent and you say, look, I want $1 million comprehensive liability policy, and I'm willing to have you bind me to that, and you tell them what you're willing to pay. And the agent comes back to you and they say, gosh, Patty, I just think it would be better for you to have a $50 million policy, and you're so lucky because I just bound you to that $50 million policy, and it's only going to cost you 5 times as much. Of course, I'll get a bigger commission for doing that. You're not bound because your agent did something outside the scope of their authority, and that action is considered null and void. It has no legal effect whatsoever. And so this is important to remember. The legislature controls the delegates at all times. If the delegates do something outside of their authority, it's null and void, and they can be recalled and punished by your legislature.
Hey, Mark. One of the things coming out of the Patriot Academy is they train the delegates and the representatives and everybody else to come back to their communities and get involved. With convention of states, are you training those similar, not just the legislators, but potentially the commissioners or potentially those next commissioners, since they're not necessarily required to be legislators?
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, we've done now 2 simulated conventions. We do those to train people up in what it looks like, what it feels like to be engaged in the process. We also, because it's never been done before like this, want to see how it unfolds. Of course, it's simulated, so it's not the real deal. It doesn't have near the pressure that a real one would have. It's just a few days. But we're training people up like that, and then they come back to their communities. They go back to their legislatures. Most of them are legislators. Train up other legislators in how this works. So that's kind of our grassroots or ground game training program for this. Yes, sir.
Okay. 2-part question. One, are you going to be, or would you be able to, for when the convention comes out, the Republican one in Wisconsin, are you going to have an opportunity to be able to hear or speak with people there, even though you may not be national, but as far as TV and stuff like that, the media, of course,
right.
Will you have a chance to talk there? And the second part of that question is, does Trump know about you? Has he known you? I'm asking because Trump is Trump, and he decides what he wants to do.
Trump is Trump. That is very true.
But the point is, he's thinking just like you do, like what we're supposed to. He says, you can't, it's about, I govern myself. Right. And so he's thinking about us when he's talking about this.
I agree with that.
What I'm driving is, would he have a chance to talk to you?
So
his ideas?
As far as the Republican National Convention, if you put in a good word for me, maybe they'll give me a slot. I don't know.
I think you would. Right there.
I would appreciate that. Thank you. As far as Trump, does he know about this? The answer is yes, sort of roundabout. There's a couple of ways. I know a bunch of people, obviously, inside the Trump camp. If you've been doing Republican politics at any kind of level, you're always maybe 1 degree separated. And so I know a bunch of people inside who have mentioned it to him. I wouldn't say these are extensive meetings or discussions. I had one personal funny experience talking to Trump about this while he was president. And Patty and I were in Palm Beach, Florida, near Mar-a-Lago, and we were out to dinner with some donors. And this is kind of, I feel like Forrest Gump in my life a lot of times, you guys, because I end up in places I just can't believe things are happening. So Patty and I are sitting at a dinner with some donors, and I don't know if you've never been to Palm Beach, it's lifestyles of the rich and famous. It's so far out of anything I can imagine. These are all uber wealthy people. And so we're sitting at this dinner with all these we're normal people, we're sitting with all these really wealthy people, and one of the donors looks at me and says, and his name is Tomas Peterfi. He's an American, but very thick Hungarian accent. He says, are you going to be in town Friday night? And I said, I'm not sure why. And Patty and I were really planning on leaving the next day, but you always leave it open when a donor asks you a question like that, right? And he said, well, I'm supposed to have dinner with Donald Trump and I can't go. Do you want to go? I look across the table at Patty like, did he just say that? Like, what is happening here? Where's the camera, right? And so I said, yeah, we're going to be in town, Patty, right? And Patty's like, yeah, we're definitely going to be in town. And then, as so many of these really wealthy older guys, looks at his much younger girlfriend, and she looks at him and goes, Tomas, that ticket is $100,000. They can't spend $100,000 to go have dinner with Donald Trump. And in the same way that I would give somebody $5 to go to McDonald's, he goes, oh, I'll pay for the tickets. And I'm looking at Patty and trying not to pass out, right? And so we stay cool, and we end up leaving this dinner, and we're driving back to our Holiday Inn across the bridge in the cheap seats. The Holiday Inn's there like $450 a night or some ridiculous thing. And on the way back, we're just like, I can't believe this. Like, somebody just paid $100,000 for me to have dinner with Donald Trump. Okay, so I'm going to have dinner with Donald Trump now, and what Tomas says is you just need to talk to him about convention of states. That's why I'm sending you. I think he would love it. You got to talk to him about it. So I go to Mar-a-Lago and, go through all the security to get into Mar-a-Lago and everything. It's the only time I've been there. And I get into Mar-a-Lago, and it turns out, first of all, it's like a cocktail reception, right? And it's me and a lot of really wealthy donors. And I'm in this room looking around like, I know who that is. I know who that is. Like, I do not belong in this room. Which one of these things is different? It's that guy, Mark Meckler. And when we get seated for what I thought was dinner, which turns out not to be dinner at all, it's at a very long banquet table. And when I say very long, it looks like something out of a comedy movie in the King's Court. I mean, this table is probably 60 feet long. And Trump's sitting at the dead center. And the major donors, the biggest of the donors, are close in around him. Advisors are scattered around. The chief finance guy, Todd Ricketts, was there. Ronna McDaniel was there. All these people, Kellyanne Conway was there. And they're all sprinkled around with the major donors. And then there's the kid at the kids' table, which is me at the very end. So I'm sitting at the end of the table, and they keep asking people, does anybody have a question for the president? And, of course, I'm like, leaning in, trying to get them to call me. They're not even looking at me because they know I'm not actually a donor. And so then all of a sudden, the Secret Service comes into the room. They're like, Mr. President, you have to go to your next meeting. We've had a very fine meal, which consisted of a bottle of water sitting on the table in front of me. That's all the dinner was, literally. A plastic. It wasn't even like Trump water. It was just like Kirkland water or something. And so not even a souvenir, literally, for the $100,000. And so now I'm sitting there thinking, what am I going to do? Like, this donor paid $100,000 for me to go ask Trump a question, and I didn't even get anywhere near the guy. And Patty is not there because they had one ticket, so Patty is at a dinner party at the donor's house, and I'm supposed to go report afterwards. And all I'm thinking is, this is so humiliating. I'm going to go tell him, I'm sorry for your $100,000. I didn't even get, I had nothing. And so I'm like, I can't do this. I just can't do this. And I'm, by nature, I know this sounds weird, but I'm kind of an introvert by nature. Like at a party, I'd rather go just sit in the corner. I mean, it seems weird because I'm up in front of a room, but that's just not my preference. And so to actually just go be bold like this is, Patty would do this every day, but I'm just like, oh no, horror of horrors. I'm going to go interrupt the president. But I have to do this thing, so I put on the big boy underwear and pull them up tight. And Trump is talking to a couple who are talking to him about the husband is running for governor somewhere. I don't even remember where. And so the three of them are standing there talking. They're surrounded by Secret Service. And I just literally kind of push my way through the Secret Service guys. And now I'm standing in front of Trump. This couple's talking about running for governor somewhere. I have no idea. And I'm just like deer in the headlights standing, well, more like this because he's so much taller than me. And I'm standing there like I have no idea what to say. And as soon as there's a pause and they finish with him, I say, hey, Mr. President, our friend Sean Hannity said to say hello to you. And he immediately, he loves Sean Hannity. And so he immediately oh, I love Sean. Say hi to Sean for me. How do you know Sean? And I said, oh, Sean's an endorser of our project. Really? What's your project? And so I said, oh, well, Mr. President, I run something called Convention of States. Oh, really? What's that about? And I said, remember in your inaugural speech when you said that this transfer of power is not a transfer from one administration to another. It's not a transfer from one party to another. It's a transfer of power from Washington, D.C. back to the American people. He goes, oh, yeah, that was good. And I said, that was the best line ever in an inaugural speech. Yeah, you're right, it was. And I said, well, Mr. President, what we're trying to do with a convention, it's called a convention, we're going to take that power away permanently. Nobody could ever reverse it if we do it. And by the way, if we do it during your administration, you'll be the first president in history to live through a convention of states and have an influence on that. I said, George Washington didn't do it. Abe Lincoln didn't do it. Ronald Reagan didn't do it. Only Donald Trump will do that. And he goes, I like the sound of that. And that was pretty much my whole pitch. Because at that point, the Secret Service, like, Mr. President, you got to go. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Does he remember? I don't know. I wake up every now and then in the middle of the night with cold sweats that Donald Trump tweeted something about Convention of States in the middle of the night, and all heck is breaking loose. I think that I would give it if I had to put odds on it, I would give it probably not during the campaign, because it's not the right issue for him during the campaign, but I would give it a 60 to 75% odds that he comes on board post-election if he wins the election, and maybe if he were to lose the election, God forbid. I'm going to close with that because I know we're at about 9 o'clock. If you guys have other questions for me, I'm happy to stick around. Petty, and I'll stick around as long as you want. God bless you guys. To the leadership team here, you guys are the best. I love you. Thanks.